As I mentioned earlier, and you might have noticed from the board, it is All Saints Sunday. Why do we celebrate All Saints Sunday? I asked that question this week, and I was actually kind of surprised to find out. There's two reasons, one that sprang up in the Eastern Church and one that sprang up in the Western Church, and they're actually vastly different. And I really like the Eastern version's tradition because it's kind of silly. Emperor Leo VI, when his wife, Empress Theophano, died, he wanted to build a church dedicated to her. And he was told that he couldn't because she was, nobody particularly important. So he said, okay, fine. I will build the church and dedicate it to all of the saints, and then she's included in that general dedication. And that's how the All Saints Day came about in the Eastern Church, because someone wanted to build a church to his pious wife and went with All Saints. The Western Church's tradition is a lot, more interesting, but a lot less fun. You see, up until the Emperor Diocletian was around, they used to celebrate Martyrs' Days, on the days that a martyr was killed for the faith. Now that started to be a problem because Diocletian had some pretty stern persecution that he was doing, so a lot of faithful Christians were being martyred, and there were too many to celebrate each of them on an individual day. And so they picked one day to celebrate All Martyrs' Day. And then as time went on, that kind of grew to be a feast to all of those believers who had gone to be with Jesus. And in the 8th century, it kind of became official that, this is it. This is a day for all of the saints who are living with God in heaven. Now that causes a problem, because what do we mean when we talk about a saint? Traditionally, before Luther showed up, a saint is anyone who is perfect in holiness and currently in heaven. Now, before Luther showed up, this was a very specific set of processes. You see, up until the Protestant Reformation kind of shoved purgatory under the rug and said, that doesn't really fit. People would go to purgatory to, nobody is really sure what exactly happened there except for what Dante wrote, and somehow that became more or less church tradition. Most of what we think about heaven, purgatory, and hell came from Dante, not from the Bible. That should strike you as problematic. Anywho, so the situation was you had saints were people who were definitely in heaven, and there was a rather complicated process to figure out who exactly a saint was. There still is a rather complicated process to figure out who exactly a saint is in the Catholic Church, but it's gotten slightly less complicated since about 1983. The things you find out about when you're researching a sermon on the saints, it's the stuff you never even thought you knew. So in the Catholic Church, there are over 9,000 saints and almost saints. Yes, there's a category that's where you're not quite a saint, but you're not quite not a saint, and it's really complicated. So to be a saint, here's how the system works. First, you have to be a faithful believer on earth who goes above and beyond the normal thing that believers do. So the first step in the process is to be recognized by your local bishop as someone who is a servant of God. Then the Congregation for the Causes of the Saints examines the individual and to determine their worthiness and makes a recommendation to the Pope that the person be declared a servant of God's heroic virtue. I didn't even know these first two categories existed before Wednesday. So then, if there's still more to come, this thing of servant of God's heroic virtue basically puts them in a category that means that it's okay to ask them to intercede for you, but that's about it. Because remember, one of the things that's still in the Catholic Church, and Luther said, why do we do that, is the whole intercession to saints thing. Next If the person was martyred for the faith, they're immediately beatified, which means that their position in heaven is assured. If the person was not martyred, then they go through another process, and you end up, basically you look and see if a miracle happened after the person was interceded to, and if it did, then they are a blessed, and then if another miracle happens, then they're a saint. Doesn't that just sound ridiculously overly complicated? I like our way better, because in the Lutheran tradition, do you know what it takes to be a saint? Absolutely nothing, on our part anyways. Because Jesus already made us all saints. When Jesus died on the cross, we became saints and sinners, in one of my favorite Luther quotes. You see, for us, this leads to two groups of people. You've got the saints triumphant, who are the saints who have finished their work on earth and have now gone to be with our Lord. And then you have the saints militant, which are the saints who are still here doing stuff. Militant, while it sounds like military, actually is only vaguely related to the military, only in the sense of still having a job to do. One of those weird alternate archaic meanings for militant that we don't use anymore. So when we talk about saints, we tend to think about the saints triumphant, especially when we're talking about All Saints' Day, when that's exactly who we are celebrating today. Because, as Luther's right-hand man, Philip Melanchthon, wrote, we look to the saints for three things. The first is we thank God for the examples of his mercy. We use the saints as examples to strengthen our faith, and we imitate the saints' faith and other virtues. I think this is a pretty good system. But more than just looking to the saints as examples to us, we also celebrate that they are with Jesus. We celebrate that they have received the fulfillment of the promise that John wrote, that we will be like Christ. They are the ones who are now serving before God's throne day and night in his temple, never again feeling hunger, never again thirsting, never feeling the sun's heat on them, because the Lamb is the center, and he will lead them to springs of water, and God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. The saints triumphant are the ones who have received the reward that we have all promised. They've received the rewards promised in the Beatitudes, and they are experiencing, let's just be honest here, the single biggest party in the history of ever. And for us, these saints aren't just the big names. It's not just Michael, my favorite one. It's not just Peter or Mary Magdalene or Martin Luther. But the saints we celebrate today are also grandparents, parents, siblings, friends, children, spouses, all of those who are living eternally with God. We remember them for the examples they gave us, and we celebrate the life that God has given them. The life that they now have, where there is no more sin, no more death, and a party. Now, I love All Saints' Day because it lets me mention one of my favorite parts of communion that we never actually talk about. If you remember, Holy Communion is a foretaste of the feast to come. So on All Saints' Day, I always like to think that when I'm taking communion, it's not just us that are gathered here today, but we're participating that little bit in the heavenly feast. And so when you come forward for communion today, I just want to invite you to remember those who we are joining with, and our meager feast of communion that they're experiencing the fulfillment of in heaven.